The summer heat shimmered above Privet Drive's perfectly manicured lawns, but behind the windows of number 4, Harry Potter lay on his bed, counting down the minutes until midnight. His small room, once Dudley's second bedroom, felt more like a cage than ever before. Letters from his friends at Hogwarts had mysteriously stopped arriving, leaving him feeling more isolated than he'd ever felt before. Hedwig, his snowy owl, remained locked in her cage, courtesy of Uncle Vernon's strict new rules. The moonlight cast strange shadows through her bars, creating an intricate pattern on Harry's worn bedspread. As the ancient alarm clock on his nightstand ticked closer to midnight, Harry traced the lightning-shaped scar on his forehead, wondering if his friends had forgotten him entirely. The sound of Dudley's television blared from downstairs, mixing with Aunt Petunia's shrill voice as she fawned over her precious son. Harry's stomach growled, reminding him of the measly soup he'd been given for dinner, served through the new cat flap in his door. Just as the clock struck midnight, marking the start of his 12th birthday, a peculiar tapping sound drew his attention to the window. But what he saw there wasn't the expected owl post. It was something far more unusual and potentially troublesome. The sight that greeted Harry made him stifle a gasp. There, hovering outside his window, were two enormous green tennis ball-sized eyes, floating in the darkness. Dobby the house elf's arrival would mark the beginning of a series of increasingly bizarre and dangerous events. The creature's bat-like ears trembled as he delivered his cryptic warning about terrible things to come at Hogwarts. The conversation that followed left Harry's room in complete disarray. Water from the dropped pudding soaked into his floorboards, and owl feathers from Hedwig's agitated fluttering covered his desk. When Uncle Vernon's thundering footsteps approached the room, Dobby vanished with a crack like a whip, leaving Harry to face the consequences of the house elf's protection. The evening culminated in the installation of iron bars on Harry's window, sealing him in like a prisoner. As he watched Uncle Vernon's satisfied smirk through the new bars, Harry couldn't help but wonder if he'd ever see Hogwarts again. Little did he know, help would come from the most unexpected direction, and his escape would involve a flying car, 3 red-headed brothers, and a daring midnight rescue that would change everything. The bars on Harry's window cast moonlit shadows across his small bedroom as he lay awake, wondering if he'd ever return to Hogwarts. A peculiar humming sound drew his attention skyward, and to his astonishment, Ron Weasley's grinning face appeared floating outside his second-story window. Behind the wheel of a hovering turquoise Ford Anglia sat Fred and George, their red hair gleaming in the starlight. The rescue mission was both terrifying and exhilarating. The twins' car swaying precariously as they attempted to pull the window bars free. Uncle Vernon's thunderous footsteps approaching down the hallway only added to the heart-pounding tension. In a final desperate moment, as Harry's bedroom door burst open, the bars came free with a resounding crack. Harry threw his belongings into the car's back seat, with Hedwig's cage barely making it through the window as Uncle Vernon's fingers grasped at empty air. The car disappeared into the night sky, leaving behind the echoing roars of frustration from Privet Drive. The Burrow emerged from the morning mist like something from a fairy tale, a house that could only be held together by magic. Multiple stories stacked precariously at odd angles, with chimneys perched like crooked hats atop the roof. Harry's first steps into the Weasley home filled him with wonder. Self-stirring pots bubbled on the stove, a clock with 9 hands showed the whereabouts of each family member, and garden gnomes peeked through windows. Mrs. Weasley's initial fury at her son's nighttime adventure quickly melted into warm concern for Harry's well-being, serving him enough breakfast for 3 people. Percy appeared briefly, looking important with his prefect badge gleaming. Ginny, Ron's younger sister, made several flustered appearances, knocking things over whenever she caught sight of Harry. The day evolved into an exploration of magical household life, with enchanted dishes washing themselves and family ghoul clanking in the attic. As evening approached, Mr. Weasley returned from work, full of questions about Muggle life, while the twins plotted their next adventure in whispered tones by the fireplace. Harry fell asleep that night in Ron's violently orange Chudley Cannons-themed room, feeling for the first time that he'd found a true magical home. The crisp September air swirled with anticipation as crowds of students pushed their trolleys through King's Cross Station. Steam from the Scarlet engine drifted over the platform, creating a mystical haze that seemed to dance in the morning light. Harry and Ron, running late as usual, rushed toward Platform 9 Courser, their trolleys laden with trunks and owl cages. But something was terribly wrong. When they attempted to pass through the barrier, instead of gliding through the magical portal, they crashed spectacularly into solid brick. Panic set in as the clock struck 11, and the sound of the departing train echoed from somewhere beyond the impenetrable wall. With growing desperation, they watched helplessly as other families disappeared through the barrier, yet it remained stubbornly solid for them. The realization slowly dawned. They were stranded in the Muggle world while their classmates steamed toward Hogwarts without them. In a moment of impulsive brilliance, or perhaps foolishness, Ron's eyes lit up as he remembered his father's enchanted Ford Anglia parked outside. Soaring through clouds in Mr. Weasley's turquoise Ford Anglia, Harry and Ron followed the Hogwarts Express northward. The initial thrill of flying a car soon gave way to anxiety as the invisibility booster failed, leading to several close calls with curious muggles. As dusk approached and the ancient castle finally came into view, their relief was short-lived. The car, seemingly exhausted from its lengthy journey, began to sputter and lose power. What should have been a quiet arrival turned into a spectacular crash landing into the branches of an ancient and highly aggressive homping willow. The tree's massive limbs pummeled the car mercilessly as Harry and Ron sat frozen in terror. In a final act of magical rebellion, the car ejected them and their belongings onto the damp ground before disappearing into the forbidden forest. Standing there, disheveled and bruised, they realized their troubles were only beginning as Professor Snape's ominous figure emerged from the castle's shadows, his face twisted with vindictive delight. Behind him, Professor McGonagall's stern expression promised consequences that would make the homping willow seem gentle in comparison. The autumn wind whistled through Hogwarts' ancient corridors as Harry made his way back from nearly headless Nick's Death Day party, his stomach growling from the lack of proper food. The flickering torches cast dancing shadows on the stone walls, creating an eerily beautiful display of light and darkness. That's when he first heard it, a voice so chilling it made his spine tingle. A whisper that seemed to emanate from within the very walls themselves, speaking of hunger and death. Ron and Hermione walked beside him, completely oblivious to the sinister voice that grew increasingly urgent. Harry followed the sound, his heart pounding against his chest, leading his confused friends up staircases and through corridors. The voice grew louder, more menacing, until they turned a corner and found themselves facing their first real clue that something was terribly wrong at Hogwarts. There, suspended in a pool of water, they discovered Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, hanging stiff as a board from a torch bracket. Above her, written in what appeared to be blood, gleamed the ominous message that would haunt the school for months to come. Professor Binns' usually monotonous history of magic class transformed into something extraordinary when Hermione raised her hand to ask about the Chamber of Secrets. The ghostly professor's translucent form seemed to become more solid as he reluctantly shared the ancient tale. The great hall fell silent as he spoke of Salazar Slytherin's hidden chamber and the monster within, waiting to be unleashed by his true heir. Students exchanged nervous glances, their faces illuminated by floating candles that seemed to flicker more intensely with each word. The story sparked fierce whispers among the students, particularly when Justin Finch Fletchley hurried away from Harry in the corridor later that day. The fear was palpable, spreading through the school like a contagious disease. That evening, in the Gryffindor common room, as the fire cast warm shadows across their worried faces, Harry confided in Ron and Hermione about the voice he'd heard. Hermione's expression grew grave as she shared a troubling revelation. Even in the wizarding world, hearing voices was never a good sign. The crackling fire seemed to echo their growing unease, while outside the tower windows, a storm began to brew. The Halloween feast was coming to an end, with thousands of candles floating beneath the enchanted ceiling, casting warm, flickering shadows across tables laden with half-eaten sweets and golden plates. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were making their way through the crowded corridor when an eerie silence fell over the castle. The torches along the walls dimmed mysteriously, their flames dancing uncertainly in an unfelt breeze. Through the gathering gloom, something gleamed on the wall ahead, words written in what appeared to be blood, glistening wetly in the torchlight. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, hung stiffly from a torch bracket, as still as stone. The discovery sent waves of panic through the school, with Professor McGonagall's face turning ash white as she examined the scene. Dumbledore's arrival brought both relief and tension, his usually twinkling eyes now serious and focused. As accusations flew and tensions mounted, Harry found himself at the center of suspicious glances and whispered conversations. In the days that followed, Hermione buried herself in the library's restricted section, surrounded by towering shelves of ancient books that seemed to whisper their secrets in the dusty silence. The trio huddled around a small table near a frost-covered window, their breath creating small clouds in the chilly air as they pored over texts about Hogwarts' history. The library's usual peaceful atmosphere was charged with tension as students discussed the legend of Slytherin's heir in hushed voices. When Hermione finally discovered the tale of the Chamber of Secrets, her excited whispers drew concerned looks from Madame Pince. The revelation about Salazar Slytherin's hidden chamber and its monstrous inhabitant sent chills down their spines. As darkness fell outside, and the library's lamps cast long shadows between the bookcases, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The chapter culminated in a startling discovery about the chamber's previous opening 50 years ago, leaving them with more questions than answers as they hurried back to Gryffindor Tower through the darkening corridors.